The story of USS Washington begins not on the night of the battle that would define her legacy, but years earlier, in the crowded shipyards of the Norfolk Navy Yard, where thousands of workers labored at impossible speed to prepare America for a war that many sensed was coming. Laid down in 1938 and commissioned in May 1941, Washington represented the newest generation of U.S. battleship design, fast, heavily armored, and armed with 9 16-inch guns capable of firing shells weighing over a ton. The ship was designed to outrun anything it couldn't outfight and outfight anything it couldn't outrun. Yet for all her technological promise, few in the Navy imagined that Washington would soon become the centerpiece of one of the most dramatic naval duels in American history, fought in total darkness, without moonlight, and guided almost entirely by a technology so new and controversial that many senior officers still distrusted it: radar. Radar would become the domain of Rear Admiral Willis Ching, a man whose background was as unorthodox as the battle he was destined to fight. Lee was an Olympic gold medal marksman, a gunnery savant, whose understanding of ballistics and fire control made him one of the most technically gifted officers in the U.S. Navy. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Lee embraced technological innovation. He studied radar systems obsessively, working with technicians and officers alike to understand the limits and possibilities of a tool that in 1942 was still treated with skepticism. Lee saw what others missed, that radar could give American ships eyes in the dark, an advantage so profound it could rewrite the rules of naval combat. By late 1942, the Guadalcanal campaign had reached a critical point. The battle for control of the island and, more importantly, Henderson Field had devolved into a brutal war of attrition. Japan urgently sought to neutralize the airfield by sending powerful naval forces down the slot under cover of darkness. The Tokyo Express, as Americans came to call it, ran supplies and reinforcements almost nightly. Each run threatened to tip the balance of the campaign. American ships, lacking experience and still learning to fight at night, had suffered repeated setbacks. 2 weeks earlier, the First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal had cost the U.S. 2 admirals and multiple cruisers. Morale was shaken. Yet the airfield still held, thanks to the Marines, Army infantry, and Cactus Air Force pilots who fought around the clock to keep the Japanese from overrunning the island. On November 14, 1942, Japanese Admiral Nobutake Kondo prepared a final strike to wipe Henderson Field off the map. His force included the battlecruiser Kirishima, 2 heavy cruisers, a light cruiser, and numerous destroyers. Kirishima, a veteran of battles throughout the Pacific, carried 8 14-inch guns and was more than capable of destroying the airfield with a few well-placed salvos. If the Japanese succeeded, Guadalcanal would be lost, and with it, the first major Allied foothold in the Pacific. The stakes could not be higher. To stop this force, Admiral Lee's Task Force 64 was dispatched to the waters north of Guadalcanal. His flagship was USS Washington, accompanied by another new-build battleship, USS South Dakota, and 4 destroyers. But Lee knew the risks. Night battles in these waters had proven deadly, and the Japanese mastery of night optics and torpedoes, especially the feared long lance, gave them a formidable advantage. Lee's only reliable edge was radar, and Washington's SG radar system was the most advanced in the world, capable of detecting ships at ranges beyond visual sight and accurately tracking their movement. Lee intended to use that advantage decisively.
The battle began shortly before midnight on November 14. The Japanese, approaching from the northwest, moved in formation, confident in their night-fighting superiority. But this time, they were being tracked long before they realized they had been detected. Washington's radar operators calmly fed range, bearing, and tracking data to Lee and the gunnery team, painting a picture of the enemy force that would have been impossible with human eyes alone. Meanwhile, the American destroyers steamed ahead in a desperate bid to intercept the Japanese vanguard. What happened next was a testament to their courage. They launched torpedoes and opened fire at overwhelming odds, sacrificing themselves to slow the Japanese advance. One by one, the destroyers were hit. Benham was crippled. Preston caught fire. Woke sank rapidly. Gwyn was damaged. The price was terrible, but their sacrifice disrupted the Japanese formation and bought critical minutes for Lee. South Dakota, maneuvering to avoid the wreckage, suffered a catastrophic electrical failure that knocked out her radar and communications. Suddenly blind, she became a target illuminated by her own gun flashes. Japanese cruisers and destroyers opened fire, striking her repeatedly. Though her armor held against serious damage, she was effectively taken out of the fight. Kondo believed he had isolated a lone American battleship and assumed the massive flashes belonged solely to South Dakota. What he did not realize was that another battleship, Washington, was closing silently through the dark, radar guiding her as surely as if she were fighting in daylight. Aboard Washington, the atmosphere was calm, almost eerily so. Lee had trained his men thoroughly. Radar officers called out the exact movements of the enemy, plotting ranges with increasing precision. Washington's crew watched the red-lit screens as Kirishima loomed closer. At 8,400 yards, point-blank range for battleships, Washington locked on to her target. Lee issued the order to fire. At 0006 on November 15, Washington unleashed the most devastating radar-directed broadside of the war. Her 16-inch guns roared, sending armor-piercing shells hurtling through the night. The first salvos hit Kirishima with astonishing accuracy. Shells smashed into her engine rooms, steering gear, and turrets. Secondary batteries pummeled her superstructure. Within minutes, Kirishima was burning, listing, and unable to maneuver. Japanese destroyers tried desperately to screen her, but Washington shifted targets seamlessly, guided by radar and directed by one of the finest fire control teams in naval history. The Japanese still had no idea where the accurate fire was coming from. In the darkness, Washington remained invisible. No searchlights, no flares, no muzzle flashes visible from afar, just silent, unseen death raining down on one of Japan's proud capital ships. Kirishima's crew fought valiantly to save their vessel, but the damage was mortal. Fires raged out of control, flooding increased. By 3:25, the order was given to abandon ship. Kirishima capsized and sank shortly afterward. The rest of Kondo's force retreated northward, shaken and confused. They had been defeated not by superior numbers, but by superior technology and a commander willing to trust it. Henderson Field was saved. The Japanese would never again seriously threaten the island with a surface bombardment. For the first time, an American battleship had fought and won a modern naval duel using radar as its primary means of detection and targeting. And in an extraordinary outcome unmatched in battleship history, Washington did so without suffering a single combat casualty. Yet the aftermath of the battle brought not celebration, but silence. The Navy, still dominated by officers who favored traditional gunnery and distrusted radar, downplayed the victory. Reports emphasized the role of South Dakota, even though her electrical failures had severely limited her role in the fight. The reasons were partly institutional and partly political. South Dakota was captained by an officer with strong connections in Washington, D.C., while Admiral Lee, quiet, intensely private, and more interested in technology than politics, never championed his own achievements. Moreover, elements within Navy leadership resisted acknowledging that radar, rather than traditional seamanship, had secured victory. Some feared that admitting this would force a re-evaluation of night-fighting doctrine, training programs, and even promotions.
For Washington's crew, the lack of recognition was disappointing, but it did little to change their understanding of what they had accomplished. They knew they had turned the tide at Guadalcanal. They knew they had proven that radar was the future of naval warfare. And they knew that their calm, precise conduct under Lee's leadership had made them part of something unprecedented, a revolution in how wars at sea were fought. As historians would later note, the implications of Washington's victory radiated outward far beyond the waters off Savo Island. It demonstrated that radar was not merely an aid, it was transformative. Battleships no longer needed searchlights or star shells to locate enemies. Fleet commanders could fight at night with a clarity once impossible. The battle also validated the fast battleship concept. Ships like Washington could operate independently, maneuver aggressively, and engage enemies without relying on slower, more vulnerable battle lines. Moreover, the victory directly shaped the remainder of the Pacific War. Henderson Field remained operational, allowing Allied aircraft to dominate the skies and interdict Japanese reinforcements. The Guadalcanal campaign shifted irrevocably in the Allies' favor. Japan never regained the strategic initiative. And from that turning point flowed the long series of campaigns: New Georgia, Bougainville, the Gilberts, Marshalls, the Marianas, that marched the Allies closer to Japan. Yet, the human dimension of Washington's story is what ultimately cements its place in history. The men aboard Washington operated with extraordinary discipline and trust in a tool that few fully understood. Radar operators, some barely out of their teens, interpreted faint signals on glowing screens, calling out bearings that determined life or death in the darkness. Gunnery officers translated those readings into firing solutions with breathtaking accuracy. Damage control teams stood ready in case Japanese shells found their mark. Every man aboard the ship had a role, and every role mattered. Rear Admiral Lee's leadership also offers enduring lessons. He was not a charismatic or flamboyant commander. He was thoughtful, analytical, and relentless in preparation. He drilled his men in radar tracking, simulated night engagements, and insisted that every operator understand not just what to do, but why. He trusted expertise over rank and innovation over tradition. When the battle came, that mindset proved decisive. Lee fought the battle he had prepared for, not the battle naval orthodoxy expected. In the decades since, historians have revisited Washington's triumph with renewed appreciation. Declassified battle reports, radar logs, and after-action analyses reveal just how dominant Washington was that night. Expert assessments show that her gunnery performance ranks among the most accurate and effective ever recorded in battleship combat. Many modern naval strategists cite the battle as a turning point in the acceptance of electronic warfare, sensor integration, and data-driven tactics. The principles that governed Washington's actions, networked detection, centralized fire control, and reliance on sensors over visual confirmation, are the foundation of modern naval doctrine. And yet, despite all this, USS Washington remains one of the most underrated warships of World War II. Her victory at Guadalcanal has too often been overshadowed by carrier battles, larger fleets, and more publicized engagements. But for those who study the Pacific War, the significance of what Washington achieved is unquestioned. In a single night, one ship changed the trajectory of a campaign, secured an airfield that altered the balance of power, and demonstrated the future of naval warfare. The men who fought aboard Washington would carry the memory of that night for the rest of their lives.
Many spoke of the strange calm that settled over the ship as the battle unfolded, the sense of working inside a machine whose parts were functioning in perfect harmony. Others recalled the eerie silence when firing ceased, the realization that they had survived a battle fought at point-blank range without a single death. Some remembered the glow of burning ships on the horizon, the rising columns of smoke marking the end of Kirishima. All understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. In the broader sweep of history, Washington's triumph stands as a testament to the power of innovation, preparation, and courage under pressure. It shows how a single ship, guided by a forward-thinking commander and a crew trained to trust new technology, can alter the course of a campaign and, by extension, a war. It reminds us that progress often comes not from institutions, but from individuals willing to challenge conventional wisdom. And it underscores the enduring truth that in war, as in all things, the future belongs to those who can see what others overlook. For the United States Navy, the Battle of Guadalcanal marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The age of visual-range battleship duels was fading. The age of radar, electronics, and integrated warfare had begun. USS Washington was at the center of that transformation. Her victory was not just a triumph of steel and firepower, it was a triumph of knowledge, discipline, and faith in a technology that would reshape the 20th century. And so the legacy of USS Washington endures, not in grand monuments or public fame, but in the doctrines, technologies, and strategies that define modern naval warfare. Her story remains a reminder of the night when a single American battleship sailed into darkness, unseen and alone, and emerged having changed the course of history.